The White Goblin. Everybody knows the story of the seven rainbow goblins, the terrible end they came to, and the way the flowers saved the rainbow at the last minute from being destroyed. But very few know what happened afterwards. The rainbows shined in the sky more beautiful than ever. Birds and beetles, butterflies and insects excelled one another in colored splendor. They were the creatures that came forth from the flowers rescued by the rainbow. The land and water animals watched their new flying friends with wonder and pleasure. The rainbow had established a unity between heaven and earth. Only one strange little creature disturbed this harmony as he watched the colorful scene with the keenest interest. There was whispering. What's he up to? What's he brooding about so fiercely in this paradise? Who is he? Suddenly, a voice cried out, Oh, horrors! It's the white rainbow goblin. The white one! Yes, the white one! Shouted all the creatures, filled with fear. They had recognized him and were petrified by the sight of him. The white one, the banished one, had turned up again. A long time ago, his seven brothers had exiled him because he was the eighth goblin. He was expelled from the Rainbow Goblin's clan, and his name was never spoken again. Dragged into the far north, he lived alone in crevices in the eternal ice, and snow was his only nourishment. Restless, he wandered through the endless cold of ice. Who am I, he kept asking himself, to be thrust out of the beautiful colored world? Then one day, understanding flashed through him like lightning. In reality, I, who was banned and laughed at, am the ruler. As the white one, I gather all the colors in myself. I am the sum of my brothers. How limited his brothers were! Whereas each of them needed just his own color to nourish himself, he could live from all the colors. At some point, the white goblin learned of his brother's death and immediately headed south, driven by his longing to finally see the colored world. And soon he was reveling in the dark red of roses and the delicate blue of the forget-me-nots, refreshing himself with the colorful magnificence of the butterflies and the bright feathers of the birds. The white goblin greedily caught and licked and sucked every color he could reach. He glistened with pleasure and became giddy with drunkenness. And then there came before his eyes, with cold clarity, a picture that used to appear on the horizon like a mirage during his restless wandering through the icy wastes. Out of the blinding light of the white snowscape arose gigantic buildings, an endless sea of houses with towers reaching up to the sky. Now he was determined to set his plan in motion. He tore himself away from the ecstasy of colors and betook himself to the deepest cleft in the rocks with the concealed entrance to the middle of the earth. There he descended into the cave city, where the cave goblins lived in harmony and peace. They had never ventured up to the surface of the earth, had never seen the light of day. Their eyelids were closed, and their life was a happy one. The white goblin began to tell them about the world. He spoke of plants and animals. He described nature in all its colors and helped them to imagine how wonderful these tasted. They could become rich, unimaginably rich, from colors, he would tell them, and this nourishment awaited them if only they would decide finally to leave their night world. This made them curious, and they began to open their eyes. They didn't want to live in darkness anymore. They wanted to go up and out of the womb of the earth. And so the white goblin led the impatient band of goblins into the light of day. There the whole of nature lay before them with all its precious colors. Nourishment in abundance for the starving cave goblins. It was a feast that looked as if it would never end. Everything was available to them without effort. Their joy gave them new energy, and they quickly multiplied. They soon became a busy people, building great cities and conducting a brisk trade in the colors they extracted. They were engulfed by wealth. Their cities became gigantic. But nature increasingly lost its color, and signs of illness were evident in many places. This did not disturb the goblins at all. On the contrary, it was a challenge to them to invent tools that could provide them with more colors, and they built machines that would advance them more swiftly in the earth, air, and water. For they had to conquer ever greater distances in order to exploit different sources of color. The more they indulged their greed for colors, the paler and more sickly nature became. It had turned gray and monochrome, and one day it simply ceased to exist. Although the cave goblins had sucked all the colors out of nature, their thirst seemed to be unquenchable. Now they built huge industrial plants in order to produce artificial colors. Smoke poured out of the factory chimneys and darkened the sky. Sunlight was no longer able to penetrate the smoke, and it was always dusk. Corrosive vapors lay over the land, and the air became stuffier, breathing more difficult. At first, the White Goblin had watched the activities of the cave goblins with astonishment, but soon with increasing alarm. When he advised moderation, they laughed at him. Then homesickness drove him back to the glacier world. Ice and snow had escaped the cave goblin's grasp, since there were no colors to entice them there. But the White Goblin made his way again into the heart of the cold world. He sometimes had nightmares, in which the destructive greed of the cave goblins grew beyond measure. But the stillness of the ice world soon made his memory of the lust for color grow pale. In the white infinity he found himself again. If one can trust reports, the last years of his life were serene and content. It's even said that he became wise, although no one was ever able to profit from his wisdom. In the meantime, in the world of the cave goblins, signs of impending cataclysm increased. There were more and more earthquakes, and yet the cities grew without stop, artificial worlds in which many illusions were created to divert attention from the threat of doom. The goblins were possessed and united by pleasure. No one listened to anyone else. Feelings of respect and love died out. Before long, one even began to grudge another the air they breathed. Hatred and envy led to furious outbreaks of violence. Wars began. The cave goblins were annihilating each other. Then it went so far that one night the crust of the earth tore open. Volcanoes spat out devastating rivers of fire. Glaciers melted, and the water flooded whatever still remained of the cave goblins' fabulous inventions. Only a very few remained, those who had managed to save themselves, and now hovered between life and death, agreed on the essentials of being. Their life and the life of their people unrolled before their eyes again, and suddenly they understood the connections. The more they strove for pleasure, power, and wealth, the more quickly they lost feelings that sustained their life. In their former colored magnificence of nature, they recognized the source of their feelings again. And because of the way they had misused the colors for their own pleasure, their lives had been plunged into chaos and of selfishness. The group who shared this misunderstanding gathered their last strength and went away to rescue whatever there might still be left to rescue. They climbed up the highest mountains and wandered through the most remote valleys, but they didn't find the least little spot of color. The land was empty and wasteful, with nothing but rubble, rubbish, and stones. Finally, they became aware that their strength was disappearing. They reached for each other's hands as a sign of mutual love and respect, and formed a circle before their eyelids would close again. This last feeling kindled in the middle of the circle a light that became stronger and stronger. Their memory of wonderful, fragrant nature with all its flourishing colors was reawakened by the bright light, a fountain that shot beams into the skies. And high above them, a cloud of colors took form, spreading in all four directions. A mighty wave of flowers, trees, plants, animals, birds, and insects, and glowing over the stricken cities and the faded ruined landscapes. The low-hanging clouds dissolved with the singing of birds. The sun broke through, and nature was fragrant. The world shined in all its colors, and streams of light flooded the land, as on the morning of creation.